I've always wondered myself, why won't the Republicans investigate the white supremacists in breeding rednecks in their party, and we're gonna go dig deeper and find out why they won't. Now, in the years since the civil rights movement, the open white supremacists have largely been stigmatized, marginalized, condemned, and all but banished from mainstream American society. That's especially true for the neo-Nazis, who have existed mostly on the extreme outer boundaries of American public life. Now, this is going to change. The age of Trump has given permission. That has changed, though. The age of Trump has given permission for the worst of human behavior, and all those kinds of norms have been twisted, bent, or broken. Now, with Donald Trump's regime, the current Repug Party and the larger white right have been willing to amplify such voices, bringing them into the highest levels of government and power, and through narrative laundering into the mainstream of American society and politics. Now, Trumpism and American neo-fascism are at once a reflection, a cause, and a symptom of growing racial authoritarianism and outright white supremacy, both in the United States and around the world. Now, the most recent example of this was last week. All 208 members of the House voted against instigating a white supremacist and neo-Nazi activity in the military and exploring how to address it. Those 208 Republicans, which included Representative Liz Cheney of Wyoming, the vice chair of the January 6th committee and hero to the mainstream commentariat, and entirely too many Democrats, and Tess Owen of Vice summarizes the situation very well, noting that this amendment passed the House in a strict party line vote. If the amendment survives Senate scrutiny, it would mandate the chiefs of the FBI, Department of Homeland Security, and Department of Defense to produce a report assessing the extent of white supremacist or neo-Nazi fascist activity in their ranks and how they plan to address it. They had 180 days from the enactment of the National Defense Authoritarianism the Authorization Act to compile that report, which they didn't. Now, the stark divide between Democrat and Repug support for the amendment is a reminder of how the genuine national security problem of white supremacist infiltration of government agencies has instead been turned into a partisan football. We've just voted to combat neo-Nazis in our military, and every single Repug voted no, tweeted the New Jersey Democratic Representative Bill Pasquarello. In more normal times, voting to investigate Nazis and members of other white supremacist hate groups in uniform would be an easy political win for both the Repugs and Democrats, but what respectable public figure would want to risk being viewed, correctly or not, as sympathetic to Nazis, Klan members, or the far-right racial terrorists? The only people that are sympathetic to the Nazis, Klan members, or far-right racial terrorists are Republicans in themselves. But today's conservative movement has become a big tent of the worst possible type. Many are ready to welcome or embrace white supremacists and other right-wing extremism to meet their ends. Now, others are content to look away, while demonstrating a shared affinity for many of the same fundamental values, beliefs, and goals. Now, Republicans in the age of Trump are not willing to alienate their most enthusiastic sycophantic inbreds, even at risk at being seen as being aligned with the hate groups. Basically, to talk even further, people have talked and found author Tim Wise. He's an anti-racism activist and author. Until they asked him for his advice and reaction. This is what he had to say. As usual, the maggot-fied GOP has shown its true colors. They're unwilling to openly condemn or investigate white supremacists and nationalists in the military, despite warnings that these are becoming significant problems among the enlisted. And why? Because too many of their base endorse these ideologies, or at the very least, they are comfortable with them. To condemn the white racism is to condemn huge swaths of their voter base. It literally puts their electability in question. It would be like a Democrat announcing that they were for segregation, but only to please note on this, the difference between Democrats and Repugs is that being for segregation and racism gets you in trouble if you're a Democrat. Being against Nazism and racist sinks you as a Repug, and that's fascinating. But meanwhile, their inaction puts the nation at risk. Racists admit that they are targeting such folks for recruitment because they want battle-tested or at least trained soldiers for their race war. Now, neglecting to investigate this issue proves that the GOP cares nothing. It just goes to show that neglecting to investigate this issue proves that the GOP cares nothing for national security and only for their own reactionary base of neo-fascists. Now, David Newert, he's one of America's leading experts on the right wing fascism and extremism. He highlights the incremental creep of the Repug party's inexorable slide toward avowed white supremacy and right-wing extremism. And this is what he had to say. So this vote in the House is really just the latest action cementing the Repug Party's ardent embrace of the same right-wing extremism that overtook the Capitol on January 6th. The GOP now openly and undeniably defends the politics of sedition and insurrection, and has become a fundamentally anti-democratic entity. At some point, Americans who believe in democracy need to awaken to this reality and treat it with the deadly seriousness it deserves, but it's escaping our notice because it's happening brick by brick. The Republican Party's refusal to support the Repug Party's refusal to support efforts to de-radicalize the U.S. military and federal law enforcement as part of a much larger pattern. The right-wing movement is working to end America's multiracial democracy, and they're going to try to replace it with a pseudo-democratic Christian fascist plutocracy, where a small minority of wealthy white men and their allies will rule over American society without resistance or challenge. In local, national, and state elections across the country, various kinds of right-wing extremists are seeking office as repugs, and they understand today's Repug Party is, to be their natural home, which it's not. A large proportion of repugs and a majority of Trump sycophantic inbreds buy into the most important claims of the Great Replacement conspiracy theory, which holds that the white people in the U.S. and other Western nations are being replaced in their own countries by non-white immigrants, which is not really true, but as a part of a deliberate strategy by global elites, which tends to mean Jewish people. That conspiracy theory has repeatedly led to violence, including white supremacist mass shootings in Buffalo, El Paso, Pittsburgh, and numerous other places. Social science researchers have repeatedly shown that white racism and racial animus are determining factors in support for Trump and the Repug Party. Now, the white Repug voters, the white Repug inbred sycophantic voters, they also believe that white people in America are the real victims of racism. Now, these delusions and fantasies are central tenets of the white supremacist ideology as espoused by neo-Nazis and other hate groups. Many Republicans, or repugs as I like to call them, or deplorables as we like to call them also, they also believe that Trump's coup attempt and the January 6th Capitol attack were at least justified, which it wasn't, and view the people who attacked the Capitol as patriots, which they're not, they're traitors. And they believe that they're being unfairly prosecuted by Democrats and the federal government, which, nope, they deserve to be prosecuted because they're being prosecuted and persecuted by Democrats and the federal government, and that's because these people broke the law. Now, members of the right-wing extremism and paramilitary groups, most notably the Oath Keepers, which is a racist group, and the Proud Boys, also racist groups, were integral to Trump's coup plot and the terrorist attack on the Capitol. In practice, these groups functioned as Trump's personal stormtroopers on January 6th, and they hoped to go much further during the reign of terror that might have followed his seizure of power after trying to nullify the results of the 2020 election. Now, they also brought in Jen Budd, an author and former patrol and intelligence agent with the U.S. Border Patrol, for her perspective on the escalating dangers from the Repug Party and the growing fascist movement that they're trying to support. Now, on January 6th, our democracy was almost overthrown, not just by radicalized white Americans, but also by many in Congress who were Repug leaders. Democrats are trying to investigate and prevent future acts of terrorism with the very people who took part in this coup. The threat of terrorism is coming not just from the white nationalists outside, but from within the government itself. We should not be surprised by any of this. The largest federal police forces are CBP, Border Patrol, and ICE. They are literally based on white nationalist ideology, as they're constantly looking for people who don't belong to deport them, i.e., black and brown bodies. The entire reason political leaders have militarized their borders is to keep those people out, while opening the door and border for white immigrants like the Ukrainians. The truth is that both sides created these agencies to enforce the laws that ensure white supremacy, but it is difficult to address white nationalism and terrorism when an entire system is based on that ideology. Now, right-wing extremism, including the neo-Nazism and other white supremacist ideologies, is a long-standing problem in the U.S. military and law enforcement. Now, repeated efforts to confront this security challenge, as we have just seen, are repeatedly resisted by repugs in the mainstream right. Now, Stephanie Foggett, a resident fellow at the Sufan Center, provided further context, noting that domestic terrorism has been recognized as a top national security priority by law enforcement, and that there's no valid reason as to why addressing that threat should be a partisan issue. And this is what she had to say: the lawmakers must address means to combat white supremacist and neo-Nazi infiltration of the armed forces. Law enforcement should not come as a surprise, but violent extremism groups highly value having service members and veterans among their ranks. In recent years, current and former service members have been linked to these groups and movements. Some participated in the violence at the U.S. Capitol on January 6, but on the other hand, violent extremist groups seek to recruit among this demographic for operational and tactical reasons. They hope to benefit from both the skill set these members would bring, like weapons, training, as well as combat and other types of real-world experience. But on the other hand, individuals with extremist beliefs and affiliations may seek to join the armed forces or law enforcement, so it's important to have policies for screening new recruits for extremism. Another concern is among veterans. America's history already shows a worrying intersection between war and far-right extremism. The reality is that the armed forces and law enforcement are uniquely vulnerable to the threat from extremist actors looking to recruit among the demographic to extremist actors looking to infiltrate these institutions, to the vulnerability of veterans to recruitment following their service. It is a security imperative to root out far-right extremism in the military and police. Now, for the benefit of the institutions themselves as well as for the country they serve to protect. Now, the conservative movement's incremental embrace of white supremacy and racial authoritarianism is part of a much larger global phenomenon. Today's Repug Party has more in common with right-wing extremism and fascist political parties in Hungary, Poland, and Turkey than with the mainstream conservative parties in Germany, France, and the UK. Now, leading conservatives, they view Vladimir Putin's Russia and Viktor Orban's Hungary as models for the type of anti-democratic and anti-pluralistic order that they want to enforce in America. CPAC held a gathering in Hungary last May that drew far-right figures from all over Europe, and Orban will be a featured guest at the next CPAC gathering in Dallas later this year. Now James Scamanassi III is a leading expert on right-wing extremism and political violence. For his insights, he was asked about the Republican Party's refusal to investigate and monitor white supremacists and other extremism within military and law enforcement, and this is what he said. Basically, he served 4 years in the Bosnia-Herzegovina after the genocidal war, and he covered the war in that country from the start in the late 1980s as a civilian military intelligence analyst. The GOP is balkanizing this country as the ethno-nationalists did in the former Yugoslavia. Now, under the ethno-nationalists, you could only trust members of your own ethnic religious group. The GOP is doing its utmost to ensure that social and political polarization goes to the extreme, and we are in the gravest of dangers. And while a large majority of the public, both GOP and Democrat, we realize the danger, and we have one political party driving us towards a Christian nationalist fascist movement, and we have no fail-safe measures to help us out. Now, today's Republican Party and the larger conservative movement and white race are a clear and present danger to American democracy and to the American society. The Trump cabal's 2021 coup attempt was no aberration. It was part of a larger pattern of violence and radical extremism, with the goal of ending America's multiracial pluralist democracy and replacing it with a right-wing minority rule. Now, the Republican refusal to monitor, de-radicalize, or purge white supremacists and other right-wing extremists from military and law enforcement is one obvious aspect of that larger strategy. Now, too many members of the mainstream news media and larger political class remain committed to the self-soothing fiction that contemporary Republicans and conservatives are capable of being responsible partners in the government and democracy, and they are not, and it's long past time to abandon that delusion. So basically, the reason why the repugs are not going to investigate the white supremacists in their party is because it would go against their base, and that means they'd be turning on their base. That means their base would turn on them if they go to investigate them. So that's why they want to investigate. So if you like the video, you can give the video a like and subscribe to my channel, RBW King. You can also hit the notification bell so that you'll be notified when a new video comes out. And if you want to support my work even further, you can donate to my Patreon link, which you can find in the About section of YouTube. And for just a little as a few bucks a month, your donation can help go a long way, and thanks for listening.